Now, as per the expert committee appointed by the Supreme Court, there is no evidence of any breach of minimum public shareholding requirements or of manipulation of stock prices. Now, if this is what has been looked at or decided by this expert committee, then how do we, or why should anybody necessarily discount this at this juncture?
It shouldn't be discounted, and it raises a pertinent question. What does the Congress party, and in particular Mr. Rahul Gandhi, really believe in? Do they believe in the law of the land? Do they believe the Honorable Supreme Court of India? Or do they believe in recycled misinformation being put out by vested interests and reports coming from overseas? It's a fundamental question. And one will wonder where the Congress party stands. Does it stand for India and Indian institutions? Or does it believe in the credibility of something that is published based on incorrect information, as seems to be available in the public domain, and based on perhaps vested interests against working against, in this case, a particular group?
Nalin, the primary allegation in all of this is of crony capitalism, of an alleged link between the Prime Minister and the Adani Group. How would you respond to this?
Well, the Congress party is really the fountainhead of crony capitalism, if at all in this country. You only have to study history. Mr. Rahul Gandhi evidently is not a student of history, and his advisors certainly don't seem to appreciate history and facts. That is crony capitalism. What has stopped is crony capitalism under Prime Minister Modi's government, because ruthlessly corruption has been weeded out. There is not a single allegation of favoring or corruption against anyone. And each false attempt that has been raised again and again by Rahul Gandhi ji and the Congress party has been repudiated, including by rule of law and no less than the Honorable Supreme Court of India.
Now, the other issue, Nalin, is of foreign interference groups linked to George Soros, allegedly, who allegedly interfere in matters of foreign countries, including India. Apparently, they've been involved in some aspect or perhaps in pushing out these reports. So ahead of G20, which is just a few days away, the state elections, the national elections next year, do you believe that the timing of these reports needs to be looked at?
For once, I will perhaps borrow from what the Congress party does. It raises questions on the timing. But this time they are guilty about not actually looking at it from the perspective of timing. The timing of this report is not just suspect, it's questionable. It's about the timing in terms of the G20, the timing in terms of the Congress party and Mr. Rahul Gandhi holding a convention in Mumbai, trying to establish that they are an alternative. A conglomeration of different political parties does not make them an alternative. There's clarity who's the leader, where the BJP is concerned, NDA is concerned, it's Narendra Modi ji. There's clarity of the agenda of governance. There's clarity about the performance. But on the other hand, there is a lack of clarity. It is personal interests versus, say, the politics of service. So there are things like this. And this report is 100% suspect in terms of its timing. There's no doubt about it. It almost seems as if it has been introduced to craft that a press conference could take place by Mr. Rahul Gandhi for him to have something to speak about.
What I find curious is, and it is a fact that an independent adjudicating authority, also an appellate tribunal, they both confirmed that there was no over-invoicing and that these transactions were in accordance with applicable law. And there was a finality in just a few months back in March when the Supreme Court did rule in favor of the Adani Group. So this is, as I understand it, and I've gone through the allegations closely, essentially raking up a matter which has been dealt with legally.
That's why it's critical to say Mr. Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party are running down Indian institutions and the institutional framework. And that's a fair question to ask, what you've asked, Vishnu. Additionally, Mr. Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party are now guilty, in a sense, figuratively speaking, of actually pandering to foreign interests. So earlier, Mrs. Indira Gandhi used to always say there's a foreign conspiracy. Perhaps Mr. Rahul Gandhi only looks back to his grandmother and understand the lesson that she left behind. They only have to go back to the history of what the Congress party through the 70s and 80s used to say. But Mr. Rahul Gandhi, who seems to have been, since we don't have details of his educational qualifications and institutes of study, seems to have spent time abroad. Now, one would wonder whether he went abroad to actually study or perhaps has learned things that go against India's interests.
Isn't the larger issue about how the Enforcement Directorate has found that 18 companies, including foreign portfolio investors, foreign institutional investors in tax havens, that these people were top beneficiaries from short selling Adani Group company shares before the Hindenburg report actually came out? And therefore, isn't this, more significantly about how this resulted in a crash in the market, which affected millions of investors, shareholder money being eroded, evaporating? Isn't that what we should be looking at?
And I certainly hope that the investigative agencies hold people responsible. And I certainly hope that somebody raises it in a court of law. Because at the end of the day, who is George Soros? George Soros is an individual. He's a businessman. He's an investor. And he has crafted what seems to be from media. I don't know him personally. I don't seek to know him personally either. He seems to have crafted this so-called position as if he's fighting for democracy. But he makes money by investing, and there seems to be, what the media indicates, a pattern to this kind of volatility that seems to help him in the share market or in investments. So the answer would have to lie with Mr. Rahul Gandhi and those who are using Mr. Soros's this agenda to further their own political agenda. Is there a connect? Is there some kind of meeting of objectives? Because at the end of the day, when the market crashes, Indian citizens suffer. Indian capitalism suffers. That's not crony capitalism. That is Indian capitalism. And this is Indian capitalism that is going abroad and actually taking over global business interests. So instead of us seeing an outward-looking India, that is now Indian multinationals, somewhere or the other, one would feel that foreign multinational interests by vested investor groups like perhaps Mr. George Soros and his company are the beneficiaries of this kind of information that is not based on fact.
All right, Nalin, thanks very much for being with us.